Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kevin Allen, and I'm joined by my podcast partner, Bob Duff, and this is the HockeyDebates.com podcast. We come to you twice a week, even during a pandemic, to discuss all things hockey. But our special guest today is a former NHL player and current NHL Network analyst, Stu Grimson. Stu, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys. My pleasure to be here.
Well, Stu, I wanted to get right into. Obviously, it seems like we're moving closer toward resumption of play. We're going to play pandemic hockey, whatever that will look like. Sounds like it's going to look like 24 teams in the playoffs with some games beforehand, but I don't think it's been close to finalized. But I want to start with, you went through preparation in 94, 95, I think, with when we ended up with a half season. What kind of trials and tribulations is it going to be for these players to get back in shape after it was March 12th when they stopped playing, and some of them don't have training facilities in their home and haven't access to them. Like, what's it going to be like for them? You went through this.
Yeah, it's going to be, guys, a real mixed bag in my estimation. I think it kind of breaks down into a couple of different components. It's one, the physical dynamic, because as players, these guys went through the training camp process, started into our regular season, were the majority of the way through a regular season, and then the needle drops, everything just shuts right down. So physically your body, it's going to require a lot given the stretch of time that these guys have been out. And even for those that have had decent facilities, doubtful that many of them have been on the rink on a day-by-day basis. And there's nothing like skating shape. As players, we're fond of saying that you can run all summer long, you can bike all summer long, but there's no substitute for skating. And skating at top level, at game speed, that'll take a while for these guys to kind of get back into that. And to me, as much as anything, Bob and Kevin, the second dynamic I point to is the emotional. It's a rather peculiar thing. Your body gets on a certain clock as a player. Summertime is summertime. You're training off ice. You're anticipating training camp, and then you start to, the adrenaline starts to kick in. The competitive juices start to flow, and you kind of go through this ramp up towards the regular season. The players are going to have to kind of recreate that all over again. It'll be a little bit similar to what we went through. 94, 95 was my first season with the Ducks. We went through a lockout that shut down the sport for October, November, December, and then we get back to games come January and February. We go through a kind of a mini training camp process. It was a bizarre thing. It gets you out of your rhythm as a player, and I think it'll really test the professionalism of the players, and then the coaches are going to have to be somewhat creative just in terms of the way they can kind of replicate somewhat of a miniature training camp and get these guys back into peak form.
You make a really good point there, Stu. I remember last summer in August when they had the World Junior Showcase in Plymouth, Michigan. I was out there, and these were the top players from Sweden, Finland, the U.S., and Canada, and they knew they were fighting eventually for spots on the World Junior team. And they played games against each other, and they were intense, but the players all talked about it's still August, and it just doesn't feel like hockey because it's August. And even though they knew they were being judged and how they played, they said it still was hard to find that level of intensity that you get when you're normally in a season. And I think that's going to be a real kind of an X factor in this whole thing.
Agreed. Completely agree. It's funny how, again, I referenced this clock that your body gets on, and you almost have physical ebbs and flows when you're used to ramping up for September and October, and then kind of ramping down through May and June, depending on how your season has gone. for these guys, it'll be a real challenge. For me as a broadcaster, now that we're looking like we're going to play substantially what looks to be a playoff season, perhaps in July, August, something like that. I'm treating this moment right here, right now, as my summer. I'm getting my vacation time in now, knowing I'm going to be working in the summer.
Stu, baseball is just a couple of paces ahead of hockey in terms of, getting their ducks in a row to play again. And one of the things that's emerged for them is a rather lengthy collection of changes that are going to occur to allow them to play without fans, and including odd things like, no spitting and no high fives and all that. I'm assuming we're going to have to go through all that with hockey as well. At baseball, they're going to sit in the stands as opposed to being, clumped together in the dugout. Are we going to see stuff like that in terms of social distancing and so forth?
Yeah, haven't really heard a lot in the way of specifics come out of the Return to Play Committee from insiders or outside of all that circle. But I would have to think, Kevin, given what's at stake. And here's the thing: here's the the piece that you really need to safeguard as we get back to competitive play. You want to do everything you can to reduce the risk of somebody in that circle of NHL, not just the players, but the coaching staff and the support staff. You want to do everything you can to make sure that you create a barrier for that for infection to happen again. Otherwise, we get back into a whole nother decision. Assuming there's a small outbreak within the NHL, what do we do? At what threshold do we shut down yet again? So there'll be a lot of attention paid to the minutia involved in just keeping people separated and taking whatever steps are possible and certainly reasonable to ensure that nobody's infected again.
Yeah, I know the players have it, and to clear their nose, the clearing of the nostril with the finger on that's gonna. I don't think people will miss that if they get rid of that.
Probably not, but I'll tell you what, the challenge is players, like when your body, your heart rate surges, you start to operate at a higher heart rate. The point you're making, Kevin, is really, you do start to manufacture mucus and things like that. I don't mean to gross out your viewers and your listeners, but these are the specific medical challenges. A player needs to some way kind of address that aspect personally, and again, you probably point out a really important area that they'll have to safeguard, no question.
I talked to Tom Laidlaw earlier today, and he said he wouldn't be able to do that. He said, I got to clear that out of my system somehow.
Yeah,
he said it's hard to describe, but it's hard to play if you're congested like that.
Yeah, without question. I mean, I'll tell you, here's another aspect that we really haven't talked about or heard a lot about over time. I think building management becomes a real challenge at the end of the day. The way we clean these facilities, and then more closely to the ice surface, building managers, operation management, just the ability to keep things extremely sanitary and do whatever you can just in terms of the way the air moves through that building to eliminate potential reinfection.
I know like a lot of the factories that are getting ready to ramp up are talking about things like that, like air conditioning and having the fan on, things that they normally would do. Can they do that with this virus in the air? And there's a lot of unanswered questions that everybody's going to have to deal with.
Yeah, and here's the thing: the best laid plans, and of course, everybody needs to be, being proactive, being extremely thoughtful about the scenarios that may occur. But let's be frank, as we sit here today among us and even the decision makers, there are bound to be things that we just didn't anticipate going into this this reboot of the NHL season. There may be a bit of learning on the fly. Let's just hope that it doesn't get us to a situation where we've got that unfortunate circumstance of an outbreak, and at what stage do we begin considering shutting down the season all over again. Fingers crossed. Perhaps we don't. Good chance we don't have to.
Stu, it's good to have you here because of your former NHL Players Association background. You obviously worked in that office and was a player rep for many years. And I'm curious your take on, we've heard in baseball more so than in hockey, but I've also heard that there are players who simply don't feel we ought to be playing, that there's too much risk here. Their families, they've got elderly parents who live with them and so forth, and there are a lot of issues here. From the player association perspective, from the player perspective, what are we going to do if a player says, I just don't feel comfortable? Are we going to allow for them to just stay away for a season to finish this out? Like, what'll happen if 6 or 8 or 10 or even more say, no, I just don't think we should?
Yeah, it's a puzzling circumstance, Kevin, and a great question, because at the end of the day, we'd love to be in a situation where we're letting everybody kind of navigate this at their own pace. But from the Players Association point of view, from the league's point of view, I think there is a demonstrated or a fairly outward show that both sides want to get back to a return to competition. What about that? Let's just say, for the sake of the discussion, there's a 3% to 5% portion of the players that, to your point, Kevin, just don't feel part of that. The union's going to be in a very difficult situation, indeed. Tough. Tough to strike a balance between that. Return to play and allowing each and every player their own personal autonomy, try to figure out how best to safeguard themselves health-wise and their families.
Another issue that's certainly come up a lot in the discussion is a role that you know well from your playing career, the tough guy, the fighter. Are they going to allow fighting? Can you really outlaw it, or how will that impact the game? Where do you think that's going to end up going, Stu?
I think that you probably, Bob, have touched on a really, really good question. I mean, one, if you think about hockey, like you've got a concern where hockey's concerned right out of the gate, and I think brings along a different level of challenges than baseball does, because baseball, really, if you think about it, and just the way the players are positioned in the field, and even the offensive player, just a single offensive player out there trying to negotiate or navigate the bases, it's possible to introduce some social distancing into the field of baseball. Not so much where hockey is concerned. Although, when two players from opposing teams collide in hockey, you see that brief interaction where they make contact with one another. The science might tell us that the smaller moment in time, the less likelihood for transmission from one player to another to take place in that context. But to your point, Bob, when you're talking about two guys that are locking horns and fighting one another, they're gripped in kind of a death lock with one another for 30, 45 seconds, sometimes more. And the possibility of transmission has to rise significantly. For me, it would be an area well worth addressing at this moment. Introduce something like a temporary ban on fighting, because transmission is probably, again, I don't profess to be a doctor, so I won't, espouse medical opinions. It just seems to me good common sense, though. The longer two people are together, the more likelihood of someone spreading something untoward from one to another. It might be a good moment in time to kind of instill a temporary ban until we get to a place where, perhaps a vaccine is addressing that. And let's think too, Kevin and Bob, the game well. As the season wears on, and I think we're getting into that area now, fighting becomes a little less important in the game. By now, folks have kind of established who they are from a physical point of view, and nobody wants to kind of take a bad penalty where the group is concerned. Anyways, games and points are just too important at this time of year.
Well, Stu, it's moved by so quickly, and we do appreciate you taking the time to join us here. Little quick hit on what your thoughts are going as we move forward. It looks like it's going to happen, and we're still not quite sure what it'll look like, as I mentioned previously. But I think all of us are anxious. I've said right from the beginning, whatever they decide on is fine with me as long as everybody's safe and we see some form of competition. Because I don't think there's a right answer here. I think everybody's just trying to figure it out.
I think that's true. I mean, it's true of our sport and it's true of society more generally, I think. I mean, there really isn't a bright line at which we arrive and then everybody's safe to cross that line. We're all kind of tentatively wandering back into this collectively. So I'm with you, Kevin. I think your point is a good one. It really is very much an unknown. We've got to do our level best to make sure that the players are safeguarded. Everybody, if we can, employ some important practical social practices. I'm curious to see, there are certain teams for me as we get back to playing, teams like Columbus, very banged up, heading into this shutdown, get the benefit of a longer layoff so that some of their key people are healed. Does this put Columbus in a more competitive spot? Does it save the Preds? To me, the Nashville Predators were a team that were kind of teetering around the brink. Is it a positive? It'll be interesting to see, but it's uncharted territory very much. It'll be an interesting season to watch.
Thank you so much, Stu. We appreciate having you on.
Thanks a lot, Stu. Have a great day.
Yeah. That's been Stu Grimson, a former NHL player and current NHL Network analyst, giving us his thoughts. Some real interesting insight there. I really appreciated your question about fighting because I hadn't thought about that. We don't normally have much fighting anymore in the postseason, but a temporary ban, like we know because we have history with the flu, which isn't quite as transmitted as easily as this virus seems to be, that we pass it along during competition. At least that seems to be the anecdotal evidence. And I remember covering the mumps, and that seemed to jump from team to team. So did it jump during competition? I don't think anybody ever answered that. If they did, they didn't tell me. So I think there is some concern there. But the question I think the tough guys would say is, if we ban it temporarily, is there's nothing more permanent than a temporary solution. So I think there'd be a concern that it would never come back again once it was banned. So that would be interesting. But Bob, your thoughts on, it's funny how we heard a lot of different things. It seemed like the league wanted to play regular season because there's some fairness to the bubble teams involved. And then suddenly we've settled into this 24-team playoff format, which I believe was primarily a player initiative. I think that's what they've wanted from the beginning. That was my sense anyway, whether right or wrong. My sense was they favored that from the beginning. So what's your thoughts on that, at least in general terms, because we don't know exactly how it'll look?
Well, I think they've got to do one or the other. They've either got to finish the season and give everybody a shot to make the playoffs that still had a shot, or you basically do this 24-team tournament, whatever you want to call it, where basically everybody that still had a legitimate chance, even if it was a long, long shot, like a team like Montreal or Chicago, still gets in there and gets to go to the dance, even though odds are they won't be around for long. The music will stop quick for them, but you never know. We've seen teams like the 91 Minnesota North Stars shouldn't even have made the playoffs. They were the 17th best record in the league, only got in because they were in the right conference and almost won the Stanley Cup. So who knows? And like Stu said, there's so much unknown here. These guys haven't been on skates in over 2 months. I mean, I bet you none of them can say they haven't been on skates for over 2 months when they were healthy since they were probably about 12 years old. So this is going to be a fantastic unknown quantity in this whole scheme of things. And, I wonder about, when you talk about not just fighting, but, we always talk about teams in the playoffs, the teams that are hard to play against are the ones that succeed. Well, being hard to play against means getting in somebody's face, jabbing them and, getting into scrums and just kind of being, roughing the other team up. Well, our team's going to be as willing to mix up when they know it could be getting themselves into this virus? And, will instinct just take over when they get on the ice, or will guys have that in the back of their mind that, will this give an edge to maybe a team that, like a Toronto team, that isn't that hard to play against, but has tremendous skill? If we don't see that level of close contact we're used to seeing in playoff hockey because of this virus, is this going to benefit a team that can ramp it up like the Oilers or the Leafs?
Well, it's interesting what you just said with regard to, when you bring in theory, from what we know about sports, if you expand the playoff field, you're just sort of creating first round fodder. But I don't think in hockey that's the case. Like, just because I don't know who the 24th team is, but whomever it is, maybe it's the Chicago Blackhawks or Montreal Canadiens. I don't know that those teams are any less likely to win than the Toronto Maple Leafs, who are much higher up the food chain. I mean, the difference in our league, because of parity, between 10 and 24 isn't all that significant in terms of, hey, yeah, like I'd rather be the Toronto Maple Leafs for sure. They got the great offense, but they got a big hole on their defense and so forth. And Montreal's got Carey Price, who certainly everybody knows who he is. And my point is that I think there's probably a better chance in hockey for a 24th seeded team to make some noise or to make an extended run than in any other sport. So if there is a sport that it makes sense to expand the playoff pool, it would be, in the NHL. And I think that's kind of why they're doing it, is in a fairness to the fact that the bubble teams in the NHL are pretty good. Now, we've gone probably a little bit deeper than we normally, I would say, a bubble team. I'm not sure Montreal and Chicago would have fit my definition of a bubble team. I think probably there were 20 teams that I would have included, as we needed to give them a fair chance. But saying all that, I understand all that, and I understand the logic behind this. But we're never going to please everybody. When this sort of emerged as the front runner, I read the comments, and just as you would anticipate, people were very unhappy about this because this wasn't whatever bet format they had embraced. So you're never going to make everyone happy. But as I said before, I don't know. No one knows what the right answer is because there is no right answer. We're just trying to do the best we can given the circumstances.
And as you pointed out, there are some players starting to sound off about their concerns. I mean,
yeah.
Radko Gudas the other day. Now, granted, it was in the Czech Republic and it's been translated, so I'm sure in a couple of days we're going to hear, it was misconstrued in the translation. But the quotes from him, he was at some event in the Czech Republic, and he said, basically called out the owners and said, you won't let us play in the Olympics because you think we're going to get hurt, but you want us to go out now and make you guys money in the summer when we're supposed to be off and literally risk our lives at possibly getting this virus. So he was quite adamant that he wanted nothing to do with it. And today, Mitch Marner raised some concerns about not wanting to really do this. So, I guess it depends a lot on who says it. I mean, if Connor McDavid came out and said, yeah, I don't want to play, I mean, that probably has a lot more oomph to it than Radko Gudas. But
yeah. No, you're right, Bob. I mean, in baseball, like it was significant that Trout and Kershaw were the first two guys that I read that said, I'm not so sure about this. Trout said, I'm not leaving my pregnant wife home to go live and be sequestered, with my teammates. So we're expecting our first child. So, safety's got to be, what we don't want is to get into a situation where, a team gets overrun. I'm very concerned, this, I've mentioned it before, about it's not so much the players. By definition, they're young, healthy people. They're very, 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 very likely, even if they contract the virus, to conquer it and move through. I wouldn't say unscathed because it's pretty nasty, but I don't think they face the potential for death that you'd have. But we have several general managers in their 70s. Rick Bowness is 65. We do have a couple of players with known underlying conditions like Max Domi, who has type 1 diabetes. So there are some concerns here, and I hope I expect that the NHL and the Players Association are addressing all those, but you can never be 100% safe when you're going to play. You're going to be, there's going to be 50 people, banging heads for 2.5 hours and, getting in each other's faces and breathing on one another. And, little things like the bumping of the goalie after the game is no longer safe. It's not safe to go and bump fists after you score a goal. The three line mates can't come together with the two defensemen to celebrate a goal. We can't do any of that because that could be, I just read today that some elderly man went to church on Mother's Day and potentially infected 100 people. We don't want to see that in hockey. So, I want to see the sport played. I will watch the golf all the way to the end yesterday, and it was just a charity event, and I actually kind of enjoyed the ending of it. So I think we all miss sports competition, but I think we still got to be very, very, at the risk of sounding like Mr. Fauci, Dr. Fauci, I think we have to be very careful with our reopening here. We have to make sure that we're doing it the right way. And I know they're trying to, but I thought Stu Grimson's point too is there's got to be something that we don't count on that's going to cause problems, because you can't anticipate. We've never done this before. So something's and they're going to have to adjust to that on the fly.
And you talk about the little celebration things. Well, what about scrums after the whistle? They're as much a part of the Stanley Cup playoffs as just about any aspect of the game. You play as the same team for 2 weeks every other night. You get some pretty good hatred going, and are they going to be able to rein that in and not do the stuff that they instinctively have done their entire career? How can you go out on the ice and compete for the Stanley Cup and still keep it in the back of your mind? Yeah, I can't go after that guy after the whistle. Can Brad Marchand be Brad Marchand in these playoffs?
Well,
he can't lick people, but can he be an agitator, or is that too dangerous?
Yeah. Can you practice safe trash talking? I don't know whether that's even possible. I don't know if you can be a villain. Of course, as I said earlier today, I have, in my 35 years of covering the league, seen several players who have been practicing social distancing before it was popular.
Yeah.
There are a lot of guys that have tried to stay 6 feet away from everybody throughout their careers, and they know who they are.
They don't usually last long in the playoffs.
No, they don't, but they have lasted in the league, and some of them have scored a lot of goals.
It's harder and harder, though, to score a goal in the NHL and social distance. You pretty much got it. That's the other thing. You look at how they score most of the goals in the league now. It's basically a rugby scrum in front of the net and banging away and getting that third or fourth rebound and scoring. That's the way.
Well, yeah. With the defenseman today, forming a pillbox in front of the net, and you're basically charging the machine gun nest. You're trying to, just pepper the shots and hope it just sort of finds a crack in the, in what seemingly impenetrable wall that they've built in front of it. So, yeah, no, you're right. It's going to be interesting, and and I am really walking the fine line on this, because I want to see them come back and play, but I'm scared to death that they will, and I don't want to see anything happen. But Well, as usual, we've moved through our 30 minutes way too quickly, Bob. But I thought this was a good show. I really appreciated Stu Grimson giving his insight. Stu Grimson is just one of the smartest guys ever to play in the NHL. He really is. He's a lawyer now today. He's got a very diverse background in terms of when you think about, he was a tough guy. And then from there, he went and worked for the Players Association. He's been a practicing attorney. Now he's on the NHL Network and he's in the media. Very, very smart man. And I always appreciate having him on. So anyway,
Switched in hockey too. I remember when he was with the Red Wings, and he was on the bench when Chris Osgood scored that goal against the Whalers. And Scotty Bowman came down to Stu, who hadn't scored yet that season, and said, "Hey, Stu, he's got more goals than you now." So I don't listen to beat. Stu turned around and said, "Yeah, Scotty, but he gets a lot more ice time."
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. Anyway, we appreciate everyone joining us. Stay safe out there, and who knows? By next week, we may know exactly what the plan is. Maybe not, but maybe we'll know what's going to happen this summer with the NHL.
All right, everybody, have a great day, and we'll see you on Thursday.